Welcome to the OCI Grails Quickcast, bite-sized portions of Grails productivity tips to help maximize developer productivity with the framework. Grails Quickcasts are brought to you by OCI, the home of the core Grails development team and your source for professional support, project work, and training around the Grails framework. Grails Quickcasts are distributed in partnership with dzone, who help build knowledge and relationships to maximize your success.
Hello and welcome to a new Grails Quickcast. My name is Sergio del Amo. I work in the Grails and Micronaut team here at OCI. Today we are going to talk about Gradle, which is the build system used by Grails 3 and Grails 4. Let me create a Grails application. That will be the easiest way to discuss about Gradle. I am here in the Grails homepage. The easiest way to create a new Grails application is either to use the Grails command line interface or to use the Grails application forge. Here I am going to use the Grails application forge. I went to the download tab, and here there is a link to Grails application forge. Grails application forge is also available in a subdomain, start.grails.org. The Grails application forge allows you to select the kind of the project type that you are that you want to create. In my case, I want to create an application, but if you wanted to create a plugin, there is an option also for you there. You can select the profile. In my case, I'm going to select the web profile, which is the default profile. But if you were building a application with a JavaScript front end such as Angular or React, you can select that here as well. I'm going to select the JEP 2 option. JEP is compatible with JDK 1.8, so that's the default minimum version that I want to support in this sample application. And the last step for me is to click generate. This will download a zip file with the Grails application configured. I'm gonna copy the zip file to the desktop so that we are able to see it better. Let me go to the desktop and zip the file. I have it here in my app. I can now import the project into IntelliJ. So that will be going to the desktop, selecting my app. This will start automatically the import wizard from IntelliJ IDEA. Automatically, it suggests me to import from an external model, and it suggests me to import from Gradle. That's correct. I'm gonna click next. Now it tells me, it recommends me to use the default Gradle wrapper, and that's what we are gonna do. What's the Gradle wrapper? The Gradle wrapper basically is a script that invokes a declared version of Gradle. You will download it beforehand if necessary. And it's basically the recommended way to use Gradle because it enables, for example, developers to use a Grails application or any application built with Gradle without even having Gradle installed in the computer of the developers. It also standardizes a Gradle version for everyone working in this Grails application, not just for developers working in the application, but also for the continuous integration server. So we have our app building in Jenkins or in Travis. The Gradle wrapper ensures that the continuous integration server uses the same version that we are using in my local machine. So that's always great to create reproducible builds where everyone is using the same Gradle version. Also, it enables for an easy upgrade of a Gradle version. By default, we recommend you to stick with the Gradle version shipped with the particular Grails version that you are currently using. For example, I created an application using 3.3.9, which is the default application, the default stable Grails version at the time of this recording. The recommended Gradle version to use is 3.3.5. You can find that in under the Gradle folder wrapper and then Gradle wrapper.properties. If case you are wondering, let's discuss a couple of Gradle related files that were introduced by us for us in the project. The first one that we were just mentioning is the Gradle wrapper properties, which is located under Gradle wrapper. And it's basically a properties file responsible for configuring the wrapper and runtime behavior. So here we have 3.5. We could actually change the version here, and that will trigger the upgrade of Gradle version. But the recommended way to do a Gradle version upgrade will be to use instead something like this, something like Gradle wrapper, invoke the Gradle wrapper command and supply a new Gradle version. As I was saying before, we recommend you to stick with the Gradle versionship with the particular Grails version that you are using, because we are 100% sure that everything works in Grails as expected with that particular Gradle version. And if you try to use a latest version of Gradle, there may be some unexpected behavior. So bear that in mind if you want to upgrade. You can always check the GitHub issues tracker to see if there is any particular issue with a more recent version of Gradle, but that's completely possible to upgrade the Gradle version of your Grails application. Another file that is here is the Gradle wrapper.jar. So what is the Gradle wrapper.jar? The Gradle wrapper.jar is a jar file which contains the code responsible for downloading the Gradle distribution. So normally it's not recommended, it's not considered a good practice to include a jar file in your version control system, but in this case you can make an exception. It's completely fine to check in this file into the continuous integration version. In fact, you should do that. You should check in all these files into your Git or your or any other version control system that you are using. A couple of other files related to Gradle are Gradle W. That's the shell script for executing the Gradle wrapper. That's the script that you will mostly be using if you are in Mac or in a Unix-based system. And then you have also the Gradle W.bat, which is a Windows batch script for executing the build with the wrapper. So this one will be the one that you are using when you are using Windows. Another file is the Gradle.properties, and this is a properties file where you find the definition of the Grails version, the Gorm version, and the Gradle wrapper version. We recommend you to keep your build as easy to maintain as possible, and we recommend you to define versions in the Gradle properties file. I find this a really nice pattern which helps to work with Gradle and Grails applications. So for example, here I have in the build.gradle file, which is the, if you are using the Groovy DSL with Gradle, which is the one that you are using, that's the default build script file name. Here we have, for example, the asset pipeline Gradle version defined to 2.11.1, sorry. And here we have the same one. We could, for example, define here in Gradle properties asset pipeline version 2.15.1, and now we could here use Groovy string interpolation. So this is a GString where we can apply a string interpolation, the same here. And that way we wanted to upgrade the version of asset pipeline plugin. We will just need to change it in one place in the Gradle.properties file. Here in the bottom right corner, Gradle IntelliJ IDEA is telling me that because I did a change in the build.gradle file, that Gradle projects need to be imported. I can either import changes or enable auto import. I can always refresh Gradle. There is a a Gradle drawer here on the right, at least in the macOS IntelliJ IDEA version, where you can always click the refresh button, which will basically import the changes, or you can also click enable auto import. That's completely fine and not a recommended way to do that. So I have covered the basic Gradles files as well. If you are using a multi-project build, you will have a settings.gradle file as well here. We have a different video, different quickcast covering multi-project builds. So I encourage you to watch that quickcasting if you are interested in learning more about multi-project builds. Another option that I would like to discuss with you is the integration of Gradle and IntelliJ IDEA. Especially useful for me is if you go to preferences and you search for Gradle, and if you go, you have a Gradle runner. You have the options to click delegate ID, build run actions to Gradle, which is basically you are telling IntelliJ to use Gradle for everything, and then here in run test using, you can select always the Gradle test runner. If you are using, for example, the WebDriver binaries plugin to handle the Selenium driver download and configuration for your JEP test, and that's the recommended way to always run the test using the Gradle test runner. If you select these options in the preference menu of IntelliJ, that's normally what I do. I normally delegate completely to all the IDs, build and run actions to Gradle. For the last part of this quickcast, I would like you to show how to run a Gradle application development lifecycle through Gradle tasks. I will be running those tasks in the command line, but we could run them using the in IntelliJ IDEA. For example, you have the Gradle drawer that we spoke about before, where you have the Gradle task and you can execute them. I will be using a more complete application than the one we created before, just for having an app with tests which we can run, and you can see I have a feeling of a more real application. This application that I will be using is available in github.com/grailsamples/jep example grails. This is an application which uses GSPs to create the view layer. It has both unit test and integration test, and it has also functional test built with JEP. We will be running those and discussing several options that we have to run the application. I have the application here configured in my IDE, and I have also a command line here in the same directory. First thing that we can do is we can run the application. In order to run a Grails application, you can use the Gradle task bootRun. Grails 3 is built on top of Spring Boot, so in case you were wondering what's the naming reason for this Gradle task, that's why. Once we run a Gradle bootRun, the Grails application will be started in the Grails development environment. As you probably know, Grails applications have the concept of environments. The apps tells me that the application started in localhost 8080. I can actually visit that page, and we have the app running here. I can stop the application. I will click Ctrl-C to stop the app. The app is no longer running in my computer. I can run the unit test. Unit tests in a Grails 3 applications are located under source test. In order to run the unit test with a Gradle task, we can run a Gradle double view for the wrapper test. This will run all the unit tests in my project. As you saw, we are getting some output about the test that has been executed. We are getting that output because in this project I configure here, if you go to build.gradle, you will see that here I have defined for all the tasks of type test, I have before test and test logging, I want to log the events such as passed, skipped, or failed, and I want to have like an exception format full. And that's why you are seeing here the events that the test passed, and you are seeing here this line of the test being executed because we introduced here in the before test, we introduced the this line basically where we are logging the test descriptor. If I find this particularly really very useful, especially when you run the test in an integration, in a continuous integration server, where you may not have access to the reports. So this is an easy way to see which test got run and which tests eventually may fail. So yeah, I recommend you to check Gradle options to have a more verbose output when you run the test. Another thing that we can run is we can run the integration tests. Integration tests in a Grails project are located under source integration test. I have integration tests in Grails are annotated without integration. I have integration tests here for some warm data services, and I have also some JEP tests. I have annotated my JEP test with add requires, which is an expoc annotation, which basically will skip this test unless the system property JEP env is supplied. And that means that when I run here to run the integration test, you will use integration test task in Gradle. And that means that those tests will be skipped. They will not be executed. Integration tests start the whole Grails application, so they are a bit slower than regular unit tests. If I supply now the JEP environment property, so in order to supply a system property, you can use -d JEP env, and I can say run the test in Chrome, and this will run the test in Chrome, and you will see that both integration tests and also all these JEP tests that were annotated with the add requires will be executed as you see the tests are running now in my Chrome browser, which is automatically run by JEP. Let me wait for the test to finish before I show you another nice feature of Gradle, which is when you have a task with a long name such as integration test. If there are no two tasks which have a name collision, we can sometimes run the task with a shortcut. So for integration test, IT is a nice shortcut that will run the test as well. The last thing that I wanted to show you is you saw that I supplied here the JEP environment property. In order for that value to be passed, you will need to basically configure in the task with type test. You will need to supply the system property JEP-env is actually the system property JEP-env. So you will need to tell Gradle explicitly which system properties you want to white label so that they are passed. The Grails env environment property, that's an exception. So if I do here like Grails env def, that will be automatically supplied even if I didn't edit any blocks such as this one in the build.gradle file. But for other system properties, if you are working with system properties and you have the feeling that those system properties are not being passed to your test, that's probably why. you will need to add a block such as this one here. There is also a nice Gradle task, which is check. Check basically, it will, in a Grails application, it will run both unit test, integration test, and if you have, for example, here in my project, I have CodeNarc, which is a static analyzer. CodeNarc will be run as well. So that check is kind of an aggregator of different verifications of our project. Another quite useful task that I use often is Gradle compile Groovy. I often, 99% of my Grails code is annotated with compile static. So compile Groovy will catch all these compilation errors. So if I, for example, had a typo here when I say find bookings and I will be executing compile Groovy, that will be discovered by compile Groovy. Yeah, that's pretty useful task in your arsenal. Another important task is Gradle assemble. Gradle assemble generated a Word file for this project. If I go now to build, that will be under libs. You have here the module name plus version name. This is the version name, which is located in build.gradle. .war, if you wanted a fat jar instead of a WAR file, you can comment out the WAR plugin, and if you run Gradle assemble, a fat jar will be generated for you, which you can, for example, execute with java -jar build ellipse yep example Grails co1.jar. That will start the application under localhost 8080 as well. And there you go. And since both the Gradle assemble is, I believe, the only Gradle task that will be used by default the Grails environment production, for example, the test and integration will use by default the Grails environment development, and the bootRun will use the Grails environment. The test and the integration test will use by default the Grails environment test, and the bootRun will use by default the Grails environment development. So yeah, sensible defaults for the environment depending on the Gradle task that you are using. Just to recap what we have learned during this quickcast, we learned about the Gradle wrapper. We learned about the different files that will be in your Grails application to use the Gradle wrapper. We used about the most common task to build and run your Grails applications with Gradle, such as bootRun to run the application test, to run the unit test, integration test to run the integration test check, which will run both unit and integration test. Compile Groovy, which is a useful task to check the compilation of your Groovy sources, and also assemble to either build a WAR file or a fat jar, which you will use to deploy to production. Of course, there is a lot of more options to explore when using Gradle. In fact, Gradle is really great because it's a really flexible build tool. We recommend you to visit gradle.org to learn more about Gradle. And as they say in the Gradle website, happy building.
Thank you for watching this episode of the OCI Grails Quickcast. For more information on how OCI can help you with Grails or any of these other practice areas, visit ociweb.com or contact us at info@ociweb.com. Follow our Twitter accounts @ObjectComputing and @Grails Framework. Also, read regular updates on the OCI Grails team blog at grailsblog.ociweb.com.